The microphone hit the floor. Steve Harvey had just done something he'd never done in 20 years of television. He stopped the show. Because somewhere in row 7, dying in a wheelchair, sat an 8-year-old boy who was about to change everything. Cameras still rolling. 240 people frozen. Producers screaming through headsets. But Steve Harvey wasn't listening anymore. He was walking toward the audience. Toward that little boy whose mother couldn't stop crying. And nobody knew what was about to happen next. Daniel, 8 years old, 16 months, fighting stage 4 neuroblastoma. His body was failing, his hair was gone, but when he watched Family Feud, something magical happened. The pain disappeared. For 30 minutes, he wasn't a patient. He was just a kid laughing at Steve Harvey's jokes. "Mama," he'd whispered 3 months ago, his voice barely there. "If I could meet Steve Harvey just once, I'd tell him he makes me forget I'm dying." Maria Rodriguez. Widow, night shift nurse, mother holding on to hope with bleeding fingers. Entered the lottery. Didn't tell Daniel. Couldn't risk breaking his heart one more time. But when that email came, when those tickets appeared in her inbox, she knelt beside his wheelchair and whispered 6 words that made his sunken eyes go wide. "We're going to see Steve." Now they sat in row 7. Daniel wore his favorite blue shirt with the tiny bow tie printed on it. His Make-A-Wish cap sat crooked on his head where thick hair used to be. The Harrisons versus the Patels. Standard Tuesday taping. Standard energy. Steve opened with that megawatt smile that could light up cities. First question. Name something you'd hate to run out of on a road trip. Gasoline. Survey said, number 1. The audience erupted. Steve spun, pointed, threw his head back in that famous Harvey laugh. Everything normal. Everything perfect. But something was happening in row 7. Daniel was laughing. Really laughing. The kind that shook his fragile frame, made his mother reach over to steady him because he was laughing so hard he might fall forward. Steve noticed. You don't host 10,000 episodes without developing a sixth sense for energy. Steve Harvey could feel shifts in a room the way sailors feel coming storms. And something in row 7 was pulling at him like a riptide. He kept hosting, kept the jokes flowing. But his eyes kept drifting back to that little boy in the blue shirt. Then came round 3. Name something that makes life worth living. Family, someone shouted. Number 1 answer. The studio exploded, but Steve stopped mid-gesture, hand halfway to the board. Frozen, because he'd just seen Maria's face. She was crying. Not the good kind. The kind that comes from a place so deep it has no bottom. Trying to hold it together while her son laughed at a game show. Trying to be strong while her sister Carmen leaned over and whispered something that Steve couldn't hear but could read on Maria's face like a billboard. They said 6 weeks, maybe less. Steve Harvey stood at center stage, microphone in hand, and something inside him cracked wide open. In that moment, he thought about his own children, about what it means to be a father, about what really matters when everything else falls away. This wasn't about ratings anymore. The entire studio went silent. "Stop," Steve said quietly. Then louder, "Stop the show." The band cut out. Contestants turned. Producers' voices exploded through the earpieces. "Steve, we're live to tape. We can't." Steve pulled his earpiece out, dropped on the floor. That's when everyone knew this was different. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve said, and his voice was different now. "Stripped down, raw, real. We're going to take a minute here. We need to take a minute." He walked off the stage, down the steps, into the audience, directly toward row 7. Maria looked up, terrified she'd done something wrong. Carmen gripped her arm. Daniel's eyes went wide as Steve Harvey, the Steve Harvey, knelt down in front of his wheelchair. The silence in that studio was deafening. "Hey, man," Steve said softly. "What's your name?" "Daniel," the boy whispered. "Daniel?" Steve nodded slowly. "That's a strong name. You know what Daniel did in the Bible?" The boy shook his head. He walked into a den of lions. Everybody thought he was going to die. But you know what happened? Daniel shook his head again, eyes locked on Steve's face. He survived. You know why? Because he never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. That hope is stronger than fear. That faith beats everything else. Steve paused, looked at this little boy who'd been fighting lions of his own for 16 months. Then he reached up and took off his jacket. That signature purple jacket with the satin lapels. For $1,000. Custom tailored. The jacket he'd worn through 73 episodes. He draped it over Daniel's shoulders. Subscribe and leave a comment, because what happens next defied every rule of television. The jacket swallowed the boy. Sleeves hung past his hands. Shoulder seams dropped to his elbows. But Daniel looked down at that purple jacket like Steve had just crowned him king of the entire world. His fingers touched the fabric, felt the weight of it, and something shifted in his face, something that made Maria press her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. For the first time in 16 months, her son didn't look sick. He looked like a champion. In the control room, executive producer Linda Morrison was having a complete meltdown. They were 7 minutes over time. The network was exploding. Sponsors are going to be furious. This episode was supposed to wrap in 42 minutes, and they were at 69 and counting. Her assistant was yelling about contracts, about schedules, about consequences. But Linda Morrison looked at her monitor, at Steve kneeling in front of that wheelchair, at 240 people crying in the audience, at the Harrisons and Patels who'd abandoned their podiums to move closer, and she made a decision that would either get her fired or change television history. She told the network to wait. "This is bigger than a game show," she said into her headset, voice steady as stone. "Let him finish." But this is where everything changed. Steve was still kneeling, still holding Daniel's small hand in both of his. "You watch this show?" Steve asked. Daniel nodded. "Every day, even in the hospital, even when it hurts. Every day," Steve repeated slowly, letting that sink in. "Why? Why this show?" The boy thought about it. 240 people held their breath. Camera operators were crying behind their equipment. The Patels were holding each other. "Because," Daniel said, voice small but clear, "you make me forget I'm sick. When you laugh, I laugh. And when I laugh, I don't hurt anymore." Steve Harvey, comedian, entertainer, man who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, broke. Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them, didn't hide them, didn't try to turn it into a joke. He just let them fall. "Daniel," Steve said, voice thick and shaking, "you just taught me something I'd forgotten. You just reminded me why any of this matters." He gestured to the studio, the lights, the cameras, the game board with its flipping answers and bright colors. "I don't do this for ratings. I don't do this for money or fame or any of that. I do this for you. For kids like you who need 30 minutes where life doesn't hurt, where laughter is medicine, where hope is still real." Steve stood up slowly, turned to face the audience, face the cameras. "Everybody in this building, everybody watching this, we're about to do something together. Daniel loves this show, watches every single episode, so we're going to give him one he'll never forget." He turned to the crew. "Bring him on stage." Maria gasped. "Steve, he can't. The wheelchair, he's too weak." "Then we bring the wheelchair," Steve said. Simple. Final. We bring everything. 2 crew members moved fast. Rolled Daniel up the ramp. Onto the stage. Steve positioned him right at center, where Steve himself always stood. "Daniel," Steve said into his microphone, "you're hosting this round with me." The boy's mouth fell open. Steve handed him a second microphone, smaller, kid-sized, that the sound team scrambled to set up. "Here's your question," Steve said. "Name something that makes you happy." Daniel looked at his mother in the audience, looked at Carmen, looked at the cameras and lights, and the 2 families waiting at their podiums, looked at the purple jacket hanging on his shoulders. Then he looked at Steve Harvey. "Family," Daniel whispered into the microphone. The board flipped. Number 1 answer. What happened next? Nobody who was there will ever forget it. The audience didn't just applaud. They exploded. 240 people on their feet, screaming, crying, clapping until their palms burned. The Harrisons left their podium. The Patels did the same. Both families crossed the stage and surrounded Daniel and Steve, creating a circle of strangers who were now family. The band played through their tears. Camera operators were sobbing. In the control room, Linda Morrison watched her monitors and knew, absolutely knew, they just captured lightning in a bottle. Steve knelt down one more time, reached into his pocket. He pulled out his business card. Not the fancy one for appearances. The real one. Personal assistant's direct line. "Daniel," Steve said, pressing it into the boy's hand, folding those small fingers around it. "You keep that jacket. It's yours forever. But more than that, this number right here, you call it anytime. Anytime you need to laugh. Anytime you need to talk. Anytime you need to remember that someone out here is thinking about you every single day. You call. Can you promise me that?" Daniel clutched the card like it held the secrets of the universe. "I promise," he whispered. 49 days later, Daniel Rodriguez died. He was buried in Steve Harvey's purple jacket. Maria requested it specifically. "He wore it every day," she told the funeral director, voice hollow. "Every single day, even in bed, even when he couldn't get up anymore." Said it made him feel like he'd already won. Steve Harvey couldn't attend. He was shooting overseas, but he sent a video message. It played on a screen above the small white casket while 200 people wept in folding chairs. "Daniel," Steve said on that screen, looking directly into the camera like he could see through it, "you taught me something I'd forgotten. You reminded me that time is short, but impact is eternal. You were 8 years old, fighting battles most adults can't imagine, and you taught a grown man what really matters. Laughter isn't entertainment. It's medicine. It's hope. It's proof that we're still alive. And you, little man, you reminded me that being famous means nothing if you forget to be human." 3 weeks after the funeral, Steve Harvey announced the Laughter is Life Foundation. Its mission: funding trips to Family Feud tapings for terminally ill children and their families. Giving them one day where they're not patients, they're champions. To date, over 300 families have attended. Each child gets a jacket. Each child meets Steve. Each child gets their moment. The original jacket, the one Daniel wore, the one he was buried in, Maria donated it after a year. She couldn't keep looking at it. The memories were too heavy. It now sits in a glass case in Steve Harvey's personal office, surrounded by photos of every child who's worn one since. 300 smiling faces. 300 stories. 300 reasons why Steve Harvey gets up every morning and does what he does. Share and subscribe. Because this story can't be forgotten. Steve talks about Daniel in almost every interview now. Can't help it. Doesn't want to. "People ask me what my greatest accomplishment is," Steve said on The Tonight Show 6 months after Daniel died. "They expect me to say my career, my shows, my success. But my answer is always the same now. Daniel. That little boy in a wheelchair who reminded me that I'm not just a host. I'm someone who can give people 30 minutes of hope. And if I can do that for one kid, just one, then everything else is background noise." The episode never aired. The network tried to edit it down, package it, make it work for broadcast. But there was no way. You can't capture what happened in that studio. Can't bottle lightning. Can't translate the energy, the emotion, the transformation that occurred when Steve Harvey stopped being a host and became fully human. But bootleg recordings circulated. Clips went viral. The story spread like wildfire through social media, through word of mouth, through whispered conversations in hospital waiting rooms. And now, years later, when people talk about Steve Harvey, when they talk about who he really is beneath the suits and the jokes and the fame, they don't talk about ratings or awards. They talk about Daniel. They talk about the day Steve Harvey stopped a show, gave away his jacket, walked away from protocol, and reminded the world that compassion matters more than content. That human connection beats entertainment. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop everything and just be present for one person who needs you. That's the legacy of a purple jacket. That's the legacy of Steve Harvey. And that's the legacy of an 8-year-old boy who taught millions of people that laughter. Real, genuine, healing laughter is the greatest gift you can give someone who's running out of time. Some heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they just share their jacket with a kid who needed to feel like a champion one more time. And in doing so, they remind us all what it means to be human.